Okay, welcome everybody to our April Masterclass. My name is Claire and I'm the programs lead here at Vets for Climate Action. Tonight we will be hearing from Dr. Jeremy Watson as he presents on our climate care program and our first of its kind for vets carbon calculator. Before I continue, I'd just like to acknowledge and pay respects to our First Nations peoples, past, present and emerging. Traditional owners have cared for this country upon which we work and meet for over 60,000 years. Its lands, oceans and rivers, its trees and wildlife. We endorse the Uluru Statement and acknowledge that this land has never been ceded. Just a bit of background on Vets for Climate Action for those of you who don't actually know who we are and what we do and what we stand for. We represent concerned veterinarians, veterinary nurses, practices, and industry partners across Australia who want climate action. We hold a unique place in the heart of communities because veterinary professionals are highly trusted professionals spanning multiple fields with expertise in livestock, wildlife, and pet health and welfare, epidemiology, public health, and the environment. Veterinarians can comfortably talk to millions of Australians about the health of animals, the importance of stable environments, and the urgent need for climate action. We advocate for animals by writing to the government, hosting these masterclasses, and attending and participating at events and much more. At Vets for Climate Action, we are the voice for all Australian animals, and we invite you to become a champion in your community to strengthen that voice. Vets for Climate Action would not be able to do the important work that we do without the support and generous donations and sponsors that we receive. I would like to thank MSD Animal Health for sponsoring tonight's masterclass. If you have the ability to sponsor one of our masterclasses or can show your support for the work we do at VfCA, we would love to hear from you. Just a little bit about our sponsor, MSD Animal Health tonight. They develop and manufacture a broad range of veterinary medicines, including Bravecto, for the prevention, treatment, and control of disease in animals. They are research-driven. They are a research-driven company that takes pride in innovation. Megan from MSD Animal Health is just going to start sharing her screen now. Thank you, Megan. Welcome.
Thanks, Claire. So hopefully you can all see my screen now. And what I wanted to do was just talk to you a little bit about what MSD is doing as a company. We're really excited to have this opportunity to sponsor this webinar because climate change and sustainability are topics that are very dear to my own heart, but they're also really in keeping with the key values of MSD and what we do. And, you know, I've always been someone who's tried to do as much as I possibly can in a home environment, but it's really difficult to maximise your impact and take that into the workplace. We know it's hard to change things in a workplace where everyone's very focused on efficiencies, but I think, you know, I'm really excited to hear from Jeremy about what we can do at a clinic level to measure our impact and try to minimise it. I feel very fortunate that I now work, you know, at MSD, which is a company that's quite proactive about making changes in this area. And it's a really good feeling to work for a company that not only prioritises the health of people and of animals, but also the health of our planet as well. So because we really have a focus on achieving our goal of saving and improving lives, we realise we also need to foster a healthy planet to be able to achieve that. And we've set some pretty ambitious sustainability goals for the future, including becoming carbon neutral across our Scope 1 and 2 emissions by next year. We have longer term goals in place as well that will also incorporate in our Scope 3 emissions in addition to that. And by setting these goals, not only do we want to stay true to our purpose and our morals, but we also need to ensure that we remain successful in a changing world where there are limitations on resources, and there are also increases in the expectations of our customers, our employees, and our investors, as there should be. So in order to achieve these sustainability goals, we've got three main focus areas, and they are increasing the efficiency of our operations, designing new products and new manufacturing processes for efficiency and minimal impact, and realising the environmental impact of our value chain, and that's both upstream and downstream. Every year, the company is awarded a scorecard for how it's performed over the year, and 10% of that is related to our sustainability metrics. And this scorecard directly impacts the amount of bonus that's paid to our executives and other employees. So it keeps it quite front of mind. Because we manufacture products, there's a significant potential for the generation of waste and the use of resources. And so minimising that starts right from the inception of design of products and their manufacturing. And we have a green and sustainable science program where our scientists have the expertise to minimise the use of energy, water and other resources and create as little waste as possible. And the waste that we do produce, we try to manage responsibly by using waste disposal facilities that are accredited and have proven that they have the technologies to manage that waste responsibly. And coming a little bit closer to home, we have our MSD vaccines, the Novavax range, which is manufactured in Bendigo, Victoria. So there are improved logistics with the transportation being within Australia, and that reduces our emissions in that space as well. In addition to that, the manufacturing site has some really good practices in place. So we use recycled and recyclable plastics and cardboard. And we also have invested in solar panels adjacent to the facility to help with renewable energy and minimise our reliance on fossil fuels. So I've talked a fair bit about manufacturing the products, but we also have lots of office spaces around the world. And there are some really great initiatives across the different office spaces. And some of those will include biodiversity. So we have wildflower gardens and beehives and bug hotels for that pollination and biodiversity. At our head office in Sydney, we have, you can see on the left here, the green moss wall at the reception. And so that helps to purify the air and maintain a steady temperature. We have a fairly comprehensive recycling system, and we've just been able to introduce soft plastics to that as well. We have our solar panels on the roof, and we have the Sustainable Commute Initiative, where the employees are financially rewarded and incentivised for commuting to work in a sustainable fashion. So whether that's public transport, cycling or walking. So some really good initiatives there. Talked about new product innovation, and Bravecto Quantum is an example of that, where we've kept the packaging as small as possible. And also the manufacturing site is certified by the International Organisation for Standardisation. So it uses renewable energy in the form of heat and energy cogeneration, and it's a zero waste to landfill site. So particularly with all our new products that we develop, we have a strong influence with that environmental impact in mind. With transitioning to recycled and recyclable cardboard packaging, we've got some estimations of the impact that we'll have by the end of next year. And this is an example of when we take things to a global organisation, the widespread effects that it can have. So there's a lot of reduction there just by that one simple change. Also in New Zealand, something that we started in 2020 was replacing polystyrene packaging with wool packaging instead. And that takes up only 20% of the space that polystyrene used to take up, as well as that wool being biodegradable and compostable. And we also collect it for reuse before it gets to that point as well. So these are just a few initiatives that MSD has taken to minimise the environmental impact of the business that we do. And I know that there's always so much more that can be done. And now I'm really looking forward to hearing Jeremy talk about what can be done at a clinic level with measuring and minimising the impact. So thank you for having us sponsor the webinar, and thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you so much for that, Megan, and for sponsoring this webinar. Just a little bit about Dr. Jeremy Watson for everyone. Jeremy graduated from Melbourne Uni in 1986, and by 1998, he had established the Brimbank Vet Clinic, now a 5-vet small animal practice in suburban Melbourne. In 2011, the Brimbank Vet Clinic was rebuilt, incorporating the latest environmental design features, facilitating a pathway to make the practice carbon neutral. Jeremy has completed short courses in circular economics and net zero for business through Cambridge University. He recently co-authored the paper, The Path to Net Zero Carbon Emissions for Veterinary Practice, published in Frontiers of Veterinary Science journal. Jeremy joined VfCA to help amplify the role veterinary teams can play in motivating the vet community to take on urgent action on climate change. Jeremy has played an integral part in developing our climate care program. Jeremy, thank you so much.
Oh, look, thanks very much, Claire, and thanks, Megan, for your introduction as well. And I'm very impressed to see what MSD is doing in the net zero and sustainability space, and I will touch on that a little bit in tonight's presentation. I'll just get my screen sharing happening. Everyone, is that working, Claire? And all good? Okay, cool. All right, so so tonight I'm going to change things up a little bit about compared to what we've done with the presenting the climate care program in the past, and look at the process of net zero and how that interacts with the climate care program. So in a masterclass late last year, we presented the content of the climate care program in detail. And so I'd refer you to go and have a look at that recording if you want to see some of the more specific things within the program. And that's available on the VfCA website. But in summary, the climate care program is really a comprehensive sustainability and emissions reduction program for vet clinics. So you can approach the program from a sustainability perspective or from an emissions reduction perspective, or a mix of both. So while increased sustainability is a desirable goal, it is difficult to compare the value of sustainability achievements across a whole range of different initiatives, from energy efficiency to waste reduction. And so by contrast, if we approach emissions reduction perspective, we have from an emissions reduction perspective, we have a specific measurable goal, that's net zero, and a common currency, which is carbon. And so that allows you to track progress, compare with other practices and with other industries. We also know that climate change is the biggest threat to animal health, and slowing climate change is really about emissions reduction. And successful emission reduction is really about achieving net zero. So tonight I'd like to present net zero as another way of using the content of the climate care program. This way we can prioritise programs that will deliver the most effective emissions reductions as soon as possible. We'll also examine how a comprehensive net zero strategy can be extended to drive a process to find solutions to the more difficult Scope 3 emissions in the future. And in addition, when you apply a strategic net zero pathway to your practice, it can be a useful and powerful tool to not only achieve emissions reduction, but also drive innovation and development in your practice. So we know the net zero space is rapidly evolving at the moment. We all know climate change is happening now, and the science is clear it will continue to progress. I also know that there's increasingly the public is starting to demand that more needs to be done. And so we saw the election of teal candidates on a predominantly climate agenda in the last Australian federal election as a clear example of this. And so we also have governments around the world pushing business to do more. The Inflation Reduction Act in the USA is devoting a massive $780 billion over the next 10 years to drive investment in dealing with climate change. And so this is going to have an impact all around the world. The Australian government is also introducing multiple forms of legislation to drive change. And we've got the mandatory climate reporting legislation, which is set to be introduced to the Australian Parliament in the middle of this year and will affect organisations down to 500 employees. And the legislation will be expanded in the following years down to organisations of 100 employees by financial year 27. And so this is going to capture a whole lot of vet clinics. And there will also be significant flow-on effects to smaller businesses who supply the larger organisations. And so business can really respond in two ways. Either you can just do minimal compliance and respond only when you have to, or you can develop a proactive strategic response to net zero. And so this is the response I would like to explore tonight. And once you take a proactive strategic response to net zero, it becomes a very effective management tool that can deliver your emissions reduction goals and also, I think, some unexpected benefits. So what I'd like to do now is to do a quick Slido poll. So if everyone could just get out their mobile phones and it's an audience poll. And if you can turn on your camera and focus on that QR code there, it will take you through to Slido. And I'd just like to see what the response to the question, which is, in the practice you're in, what is the most effective thing you can do to help the future of animal health? And there's four options. You can only choose one. Either improve recycling and eliminate waste, measure and reduce your carbon footprint to zero, install solar panels, or influence your clients to do more about climate change. Okay, so we've got 6 responses already. That's pretty good. Everyone's pretty quick off that. Just give it a couple more minutes. Carbon footprint's leading at the moment. Make sure you press send too once you've made your choice. Okay, all right. Well, I'll leave that poll open so you can continue to respond. And what I might do is at the end of the night, we will be forwarding on some CPD questions after the webinar tomorrow, and we can also include the audience poll results in that. So you can keep contributing to that over the course of the presentation tonight. But we have a little bit of stuff to get through, so we might move on to the next slide. So really, to frame our discussion tonight, I'd like to define what we mean about sustainability and net zero. So sustainability is a term we often hear about in a number of different contexts. And sustainability is the overall concept that we can't really continue to dump waste into the environment for future generations to deal with. Net zero is where we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions as much as possible and then use drawdown, that is, processes that take carbon out of the atmosphere and return it to the earth. So the net impact on the atmosphere is no additional greenhouse gases. And you can see here on that Venn diagram on the right, a large part of what we do to achieve net zero will also fulfill our sustainability goals. And another concept we need to appreciate is that net zero is inevitable. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere will eventually stabilise, but the question is for us, can we act quickly enough to stabilise it at levels that will limit temperature increases to 1.5 or 2 degrees, which is in line with the Paris Agreement, or do we just continue business as usual and nature will stabilise it for us, but at temperature levels that will make much of the planet uninhabitable? And I'll just, I know I've presented these graphs a number of times before, but just to refresh for those people who are new to these graphs, I'll just run through them quickly to give you an update on where the climate science is at. So this one here on the top left is taken from a webinar on the Vets for Climate Action website by Professor Mark Howden. He's an acclaimed climate scientist, Nobel Prize winner, and also board member of the VfCA. And this is a really clever study where they used gas bubbles from ice core samples to be able to measure the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere over the last 800,000 years. And you can see here that this red line goes up and down roughly about 8 times in the 800,000 years. And when we have the high points, we have a warm period. And when we have these troughs down here, we have an ice age. There's probably, I believe, about 5 or 6 degrees between the bottom and the top. But in that time, the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere never went above 300 parts per million. But we can see here now, in the last 200 years, that the carbon dioxide levels have now gone up to about 420. So it's never really been this high in the last 800,000 years. And I think that we've, given that this time scale is 800,000 years, we haven't even had a chance to see what the full effects of that change will be. But, if you just looked at this, you could think, well, when carbon dioxide levels go up, the temperature goes up. And that's what we're starting to all experience. I think 2023 was the warmest year on record. Just down here, if we look at what the global emissions levels are doing, so they've been climbing since 1990. We had a little dip here in the global financial crisis. And then in 2021, when we had the COVID pandemic, we had a significant dip there. But emissions have started to return to pre-pandemic levels maybe, just maybe, they're starting to flatten out. But mindful that we need to get them to zero by 2050. That's the goal. And so you can see over here, this graph is taken from the Climate Action Tracker, and it looks at what the different emissions scenarios are. And we can see that this is where we are at the moment. And this blue line here represents what the current policies and actions, where they're taking us. And so with all the current government policies and actions that they've committed to, we're heading to maybe 2.5 to nearly 3 degrees of global warming. The Paris Accord, which we're all led to believe is where we're going to somehow get, which is between 1.5 and 2 degrees of warming, it requires an emissions path like this. So we really have to get a significant drop of emissions by 2030, which is here. So we have to really bend this curve very quickly if we're going to have any chance of staying within the 1.5 to 2 degree scenario, which is the Paris Accord. And then the other interesting question is, well, what's a couple of degrees? How's that going to impact on the world? And in particularly, how's that going to impact on animal health? And so these graphs were taken from the latest IPCC summary for policymakers. And what it's looking at is the percentage of animal species and seagrasses exposed to potentially dangerous temperature conditions. And you can see over here that purple is 100% exposure of those animals to dangerous temperature conditions. And you can see that when you get into the 3 and 4 degrees, that large areas of the tropics, 100% of animals and both sea and land animals are going to be exposed to potentially dangerous conditions. And this means that the coral reefs there won't survive, and that animals will either dislocate to cooler climates, or if they're not able to do that, then they're just going to perish. So potentially there is a lot at stake. Okay, so what can vets do about climate change? So we all know we're vets, we're trained scientists, we understand the science and the impact of these changes. But unfortunately, many people who understand the science, we often hear the response, well, we're so small and the problem is so huge, or how can any of our actions make a meaningful difference? And really, this is like any other process of change management. People naturally want to find convenient excuses as to why they don't need to change. People like to stay in their comfort zone. But as we all know, getting out of your comfort zone is really where the fun starts. So I would encourage you that if you're thinking like this, to move out of that comfort zone and actually start enjoying what there is to offer, which is what I'm trying to present tonight. So as vets who understand the science and want to do more, we can ask, how can the veterinary industry take proactive strategic response to dealing with climate change? And there's really two components to a strategic response. We can reduce our own emissions to zero, and we can use our influence within the community as a trusted scientific voice for animal health. And remember that about more than 60% of the population own and care for animals. So we can use this influence to build widespread support for emissions reduction. If people see their vet reducing emissions, then it must be okay. And good government policy is the most powerful tool to generate widespread change in the community. And politicians are more likely to implement good policy if they're influenced by widespread public support and advocacy. And this is what we do at Vets for Climate Action. The VfCA's strategic plan is set up to support both these strategies. However, we do need an ongoing funding base, and I'm going to urge you all to visit our website after tonight's presentation and set up to make a regular monthly donation. We do need funding to keep these activities going, so please give that some consideration at the end of tonight's presentation. Okay, so I'm going to present net zero as a must-have management tool of the 21st century. The science is clear that climate change will continue to progress, and we will have to deal with it. And if there is one thing that is good for business planning, it is certainty. And it's certain that climate change will continue to progress and impact on your practice, often in ways you may not expect. And for anyone out there who thinks their practice is not impacted by climate change now, only needs to take a look at their increasing insurance premiums. The cost of climate risk is already being imposed on the whole community now, and it is increasing. Last year, rising insurance premiums added 0.2% to the inflation rate in Australia. As we know, the solution to limiting climate change is to reduce worldwide emissions to net zero as soon as possible, ideally before 2050. So we can now explore a proactive approach and consider net zero as an opportunity. You can use it to drive change and innovation in your practice. And before I go on, to avoid any confusion in this presentation, when I refer to net zero, I really mean the pathway or the process needed to achieve net zero carbon emissions. So with net zero, you really need to analyse the various systems in your practice and then implement innovative solutions to reduce emissions to zero. Once we start to analyse our systems, we immediately discover better ways of doing things. And we all know this from the COVID pandemic. From a management point of view, net zero has the key features of a good management tool. The goal can be clearly defined, net zero by 2050 or even earlier. You can measure progress using a single common currency, which is carbon. Smart goals can be applied, that is, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-sensitive goals. Fourthly, net zero affects all aspects of your practice. And the fifth point is vet practice is about a culture of care, and caring for the climate because of its impact on animal health aligns with a culture of care. And lastly, the sixth point there is net zero allows comparison with other practice. This way, high-performing practices can be identified and they can share their ideas to help other practices. And lastly, we know the drivers to achieve net zero will continue to intensify. But really, net zero is really about systems and systems analysis. To implement the path to net zero, we need to understand and analyse the various systems in veterinary practice. For example, net zero touches all the systems within your practice: your energy use, your standards of care, your waste management, your purchasing, your supply chain relationships, your staff engagement and retention, marketing, client value, and more. So having a strategic response also recognises improved environmental health, and animal health will also benefit human health. And this is the concept encompassed by the One Health paradigm that we hear so much about these days. And we also know that all political parties in Australia have committed to net zero by 2050, and the majority of the community supports this goal. So carbon is a common currency that connects your team with their net zero activities to One Health and the wider community to net zero expectations. Veterinary team members can understand that changes in their workplace driven by an effort to reduce carbon also align with what they hear in the public domain about net zero, and that reducing carbon is good for the environment because it will benefit animal health and human health. Okay, so now let's look at the path to net zero emissions in veterinary practice. So there's really 6 steps in the process, and there are 2 steps that are particularly critical. So the first step, which is the most important step, is for management to decide to embark on a path to net zero, and then align that with their existing business strategies. Net zero impacts all aspects of your practice, so it's important to align this with things like budget, standards of care, recruitment, marketing, and client value. And by contrast, some examples of how a lack of alignment can be damaging to your net zero strategy would be, say, if we're expected to reduce the use of isoflurane and continue to maintain standards of care, but management doesn't provide adequate training or monitoring equipment. Or another example would be if the team wants to do better recycling, but there is no budget to buy colour-coded bins or better sorting of waste. And then the second step there, setting of targets, is to set science-based targets. Targets should include annual reductions, a near-term reduction, which at the moment is 20 to 30, but typically your near-term reduction is 5 to 10 years. And so we're starting to see a 2035 target emerge, and for most businesses, and then for net zero target of 2050. For example, if you want to analyse a company's net zero claims, and I was very pleased to see that Megan had mentioned this in her introduction, the first thing you should go to do is their annual sustainability report and see if they've set a science-based emissions target, which MSD has. I'm very pleased to see that. In the third step here, it's about measuring your footprint. And there are 3 components to the carbon footprint. So we've got scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. So scope 1 is really the direct emissions from your practice, such as burning fuel for heating, venting anesthetic gas to the atmosphere, or internal combustion engine vehicles owned and used in the practice. And then we have scope 2, which is emissions caused by the production of electricity that you purchase from the grid. And then with scope 3, we have all other emissions created by the activities of your business. And examples include employee travel to work, pets cremation, waste to landfill, medical consumables, conference travel and accommodation, and even cloud-based software. And then the fourth step is about reporting, which can be done in a number of ways, but the simplest is to report internally to your team to identify and prioritise areas for reduction. And more detailed reporting is required for government compliance, or if you're intending to be listed on a public register, such as Climate Active in Australia. And reporting can be the total emissions of your practice or the emissions intensity per full-time vet equivalent. So the real power of reporting intensity
Sorry, Jeremy, I think you
Yeah.
froze for a second just there.
Okay.
Maybe about 5 seconds.
Am I still going or not?
Yeah.
Okay, back on chat.
Perfect.
Right, thanks, Claire. Yes, so the comparison is measuring your total emissions or measuring your emissions intensity, which is per full-time vet. So the real power of measuring your reporting intensity is that allows a comparison of efforts between practices. For example, a practice that puts all its efforts into recycling will not have as much emissions reduction as the practice that changes to green power and stops using gas. And we'll see this in a later example in the presentation tonight. Excuse me. Okay, and the 5th step is also the other crucial step in this pathway, and it's about implementing your carbon reduction program. And so the Climate Care program really makes this crucial part of this pathway easy for your team to implement. And the benefit of the Climate Care program is it not only provides you with the tools for emissions reduction, but it also provides the training for your team so that they understand why it's important and encourages them to have ownership of the solutions. And this is a really important part of change management in your team. And then finally, it's important to collaborate with suppliers and celebrate success with your team and clients. And this helps build positive feedback loops. The process then returns back to management. So we have these arrows back here for review and repeat to drive down emissions year on year. And I'd really like to stress that your focus should be on emissions reduction. To finally get to net zero, it's likely that some carbon credits will be needed, but this should really be reserved for the last 10% of the residual emissions. And really further discussion of this is really perhaps beyond today's presentation. But I really want to stress that it's about emissions reduction at the moment, not purchasing carbon credits. Okay, so if you've decided that you're going to start doing something about your carbon footprint, where do we start? And what are you going to do in year 1? So we know that there are increasing pressures on veterinary practice to respond to net zero, and managers of the practices are starting to recognise this. So there's got government regulation, as I mentioned earlier, and appreciation of deteriorating climate science predictions, direct impact of extreme weather, increasing community and staff expectations will all drive management to respond. And it's most important to understand that to sustain the path to net zero all the way through to 2050, you really need to have management on board. So I think really the key is to keep it simple in your first year. There's a lot to take in. Just aim to set up your measuring and reporting processes and aim for some sort of annual reduction at a minimum. You can measure your carbon footprint using the VfCA carbon calculator, which is soon to be released in the updated modules of the Climate Care program. It measures scope 1 and 2 emissions because they're easy to measure and you have direct control over them. There are also existing reduction strategies which you can find in the Climate Care program, so it's possible to achieve significant reductions, as we'll see in the example to follow. And then reporting can begin with a briefing to your team and explain the reasoning behind the data. The Climate Care program provides lots of easy to follow resources to explain the concept of climate change, carbon and net zero to your team. And you can use these in your team meeting. You'll need to manage the process of change within your team, so a strong understanding of why change is needed will help support the process. And then with reduction strategies, you can use the information in the Climate Care program to implement your emissions reductions. Start with easy changes that have maximal emissions reductions. Monitor your progress with quarterly updates to your team and celebrate success. And then collaborate with colleagues and suppliers to facilitate the process. So certainly collaboration is the theme that came out of the courses that I did through Cambridge University. It's really the key to solving the whole climate crisis problems. It's really going to be about widespread collaboration. Okay, so let's use my clinic, the clinic where I work, the Bravecto Vet Clinic, as a case study. Now, I've chosen 2014 as our baseline because this is prior to us really making any of the changes such as solar panels and changing our gas appliances. And so if you're a practice that hasn't started their journey at all, then this could well be the kind of profile that you would have in your practice. We're a 6-vet small animal practice, and the size of our building is about 400 square metres. But if we look in 2014 at our emissions, and I plug the numbers into the carbon calculator, we had about 5 tonnes of emissions due to isoflurane, refrigeration gases. So this is gases that escape from air conditioners and refrigeration and freezers. And then natural gas used for heating and hot water contributed 2 tonnes, but by far most of the emissions profile is due to purchases of electricity from the grid. So we decided that we would, if you're in year 1, that you're going to start on your grid electricity and gas. So the first thing you can do is change to a 100% green power provider, and immediately 21 becomes 0, just like that. So it's very quick and easy to get that significant emissions reduction. And then in our case, we decided to stop using gas space heaters and just use our reverse cycle air conditioners for heating as well as cooling. We were also able to replace our gas hot water service with a new generation energy efficient electric heat pump hot water service. These units are extremely energy efficient, and as you'll see in a minute, we are able to use the power from our solar panels in the daytime to heat our hot water, and so it becomes a very economical process. We also stopped using our gas clothes dryer and bought an industrial electric dryer, and actually our nursing team found that this was doing a better job anyway, and for most of the day it's running off the power generated by our solar panels. And so so as you can see here, some significant emissions reductions with these changes. Unfortunately, isoflurane has doubled. The practice actually doubled in size in that time, twice as many staff, twice as much turnover. But if we have a look at our energy bills, in 2014 we spent $10,000, and in 2023 we spent half that for twice as big a practice. And that also includes charging 2 electric vehicles for about 20,000 kilometres, because we do have a lot of surplus electricity during the daytime. So while there's been, I guess, significant emissions reduction and financial savings, these changes, however, have done little to engage your team in net zero process. So rooftop solar and a new hot water service doesn't really get much team engagement. But team engagement is crucial to the long-term success of a good net zero strategy. And this is particularly important when we get to the difficult to resolve scope 3 emissions. And I'll elaborate a bit more about that in a minute. So if we're going to use this net zero model and we want to get some team engagement and significant emissions reduction, and if we look back here, there's a significant amount of emissions due to isoflurane, then this is a really good one to tackle. And so that's what we've been working on at Brimbank Vet Clinic over the last 3 years. So there are a number of benefits to choosing anaesthetic gas as an emissions reduction goal. It engages the whole team. You can achieve significant emissions reductions and solutions are already available. So by completing a thorough review of anaesthesia in our practice, we discovered a whole lot of improvements. The whole anaesthetic system starts with the initial discussion with the vet about the need for a procedure under anaesthetic, involves all of the team, including reception and the nursing team, and finishes with a follow-up call the day after the procedure. And the third step there in the process is to measure our baseline. We just use bottles of isoflurane, but then this can be converted to tons of CO2 for reporting and comparison at the end of the year. And this is probably more relevant for your year-on-year comparisons. And then the fourth step was to set a goal. We really just set a goal to reduce in the first year, and in our case, we're really unsure as to how much could be achieved, but the long-term goal is to have zero carbon. And then the fifth point there, you can choose the model from the Climate Care Program. Module 6 contains all the information you need to make a significant reduction in your isoflurane use. Then implementing the changes, recognising that there is a process to follow. And again, it's this change management process, the why, the how, the repetition needed to normalise change, and then to measure and celebrate success. And then lastly, we need to review and analyse the outcomes, reward the team, and repeat the process and refinements for year 2. So let's look how this has played out. What are the benefits of using net zero to drive anaesthesia at the Brimbank Vet Clinic? So firstly, by completing a thorough review of anaesthesia in our practice, we actually discovered there was a whole lot of improvements. And I have to be honest, we hadn't actually given anaesthesia a lot of attention for a few years. And our system was pretty straightforward. After induction, everything went on to 2 litres a minute oxygen, 2% isoflurane. We didn't lose any patients, and we generally thought that's as much as we would do for anaesthesia for most patients. Our initial approach was to simply reduce flow rates and use more appropriate to the weight of the animal. And we started using more fentanyl CRIs. And so in our first year, we achieved a 10% reduction in our isoflurane use. However, in our second year, we focused on another sustainability initiative, which was to reduce paper. So we transitioned to a paperless hospital management, monitoring and admission system, and this took a lot of time and involved a lot of change for the team. And as a consequence, we paid less attention to oxygen flow and reverted to our old ways. And also, as our practice grew after COVID pandemic, and the result was that our isoflurane use actually went up in our second year. And I guess this kind of highlights the process of change management, that not everything is smooth. Often we do think it's a good idea, but then revert back to our old ways. And so you need to be persistent and keep revisiting the goals and looking for ways of doing things differently. So having had our new practice hospital management system in place, in our third year, we conducted a much more thorough review of anaesthesia after viewing an excellent webinar by Dr. Donna White, and this is available on the Vets for Climate Action website and is also part of the Climate Care Program. And also one of our recent graduate vets delivered an excellent in-house webinar on the benefits of low-dose medetomidine pre-meds. We'd always been using ACE and I think methadone, and it's actually been quite a learning moment to find that new graduates actually come loaded with a whole lot of new information. And as a result, we were able to reduce the isoflurane by nearly 50% in this financial year 24. And I think there's a number of important learning outcomes that benefited the practice. First of all, we're doing much better analgesia. Secondly, there's much less anxiety. Patients are happier. There's less catecholamines prior to induction. The dog ward is not so noisy, and everyone likes that. We also introduced capnography, a much better standard of care. And I know we should have introduced this much earlier. But I guess it's the net zero goal that's driving all these changes. We also had some team innovation, and we've actually developed the calm admission protocol. And this is where we identified that a lot of patients are anxious, a lot of clients are anxious about anaesthesia. And so we've developed a mission where by using medetomidine as a pre-med, getting the clients to actually arrive with their pet and pre-med them while they wait. And then we line up the team to take their procedure straight through and be done. And then as soon as it wakes up, we ring the owners and have them come and get it. So they virtually don't stay in hospital any longer than they absolutely have to. Clients love this, and it's been a really successful program. So that's been a win that's come out of this whole process of trying to reduce our emissions in practice. The other thing we need to appreciate, change takes time. You need to be patient and persistent, and don't try and do everything at once. And emissions don't always go down, so you need to be honest in your reporting. Change can be complex, and this is also the case that they find in the corporate sector. And you'll see in a lot of the corporate recommendations for corporate reporting that it's important to be honest and to explain that when things go up and why that happens, and then go and revisit your strategy to try and correct the change in movement towards the goals that you're setting. Okay, so we've focused on scope 1 and 2 emissions. That's what you can measure with the climate care calculator that we have in the climate care program. Now let's look at the rest of the carbon footprint, which is to bring in scope 3 emissions. Remember, scope 3 emissions are created away from your practice. They're your responsibility because you bought, used, and disposed of goods and services in the course of your business. Measuring scope 3 emissions is far more complex. And so at this stage, I'd recommend that probably it's better to use the services of a consultant carbon auditor. And we use a company called Pangolin, who very generously donated the carbon calculator that we have included in the climate care program. And I think the more complex, and my experience of measuring scope 3 emissions is it's a bit like bookkeeping. It's far better if someone else does it than you do it. Scope 3, however, is the largest component of your practice carbon footprint. So it's bigger than scope 1 and 2, and it's where we encounter the biggest challenges to reduce. And this has been the experience in other sectors of the economy. It's always the scope 3 is where the difficult stuff is. We have existing solutions for most of scope 1 and 2. And so by way of example, I've shown here the scope 3 emissions profile of the Brimbank Vet Clinic. And so we can see here that employee commute is the biggest component. Then we have chemicals, drugs and consumables, software, waste to landfill, pets, cremation, telecommunications, and the rest, as you can see there. And it's interesting that waste to landfill only accounts for about 4 tonnes of emissions. And so reducing your waste to landfill is difficult, and even if you can, you're not going to get the level of emissions reductions that you will, say, if you change your use of isoflurane or if you changed to green power supply. And if you think about it, waste to landfill, most of that is going to be coming from chemicals and consumables and things that you buy, your drapes, all of the surgical consumables. They're the things that are going to finish up to most of your landfill. And then ultimately what we want to do with our waste to landfill is not have any at all. And so that goes back to pushing back to the companies that supply the chemicals and consumables to be able to supply a product that doesn't go to landfill and that they take back as a manufacturer. Okay, so how can we solve scope 3 emissions? So some emissions already have reduced carbon alternatives. So we know employee commute, so zero emissions vehicles, things like riding your bike is also, or walking to work, if that's possible, can also, of course, significantly reduce your employee commute. Then there's pets cremations. So there's existing solutions for pet cremation, which have reduced carbon impacts, such as aquamation, or there's even terramation. And then we've got waste for landfill, which is things like recycling, the circular economy. And then, as I mentioned earlier, about considering what you purchase will ultimately finish up in landfill. So again, collaboration is the key to solving the difficult scope 3 emissions. You need to get together with all the stakeholders in the supply chain, excuse me, and formations of a task force to coordinate and collaborate. So this is what happens in the corporate sectors. They have a difficult problem. They get a task force set up to try and see who's got ideas to start reducing. And that's when the real power of collaboration starts to come to the fore. And so if you can involve your whole team in the process, then that's when people are likely to come up with ideas that can solve some of these more difficult Scope 3 emissions. And we also need to have leadership with local, national and international organisations. And again, that's where supporting the leadership of organisations like the VfCA to coordinate task forces is really important. And last year, we started to get together a group of supply chain stakeholders within anaesthesia to start looking at how we can provide some resources to help practices transition away from anaesthetic gases. And so again, I'll throw out, we do need to have some more donations to help the VfCA continue to support the setup of things like task forces to deal with Scope 3 emissions. Okay, so now let's look at net zero to systematically reduce waste and lead to solving your Scope 3 emissions. The recycling and waste reduction is an interesting net zero case study. And so one of the most common reasons people come to join the Climate Care program is they want to do better recycling and reduce waste. Everyone in practice understands the appalling amount of waste we generate on a daily basis. Waste reduction and recycling is a great way to engage the whole team in sustainability in an ongoing way. However, it doesn't reduce your emissions by much compared to a lot of other things that you can do. So if you wanted quick emissions reductions, you wouldn't really start with recycling and waste management. However, if you want to harness the creative energies of a team to help solve difficult Scope 3 emissions, then recycling and waste reduction is an important long-term asset. And the practical reality of waste and recycling in Australia is that while you'll get some easy initial wins with minimising waste to landfill, in most areas you'll... Sorry, we're still there, Claire? Cool, okay. The practical reality is that waste and recycling in Australia is that while you get some easy initial wins with minimising waste to landfill, in most areas you'll reach a barrier where a range of medical consumables cannot be recycled. And so the long-term solution is for you to source zero carbon products that can be returned to the manufacturer to be reused. And the beauty of the net zero approach is that you can use carbon to measure, drive and guide you on a pathway. And so when manufacturers actually push to analyse their carbon intensity, each of the products that they supply, they have the opportunity to improve. And again, it's just like reviewing their systems. They start to find that there are better ways of doing things. And so I've included a couple of examples here of how this process could work with things like a ream of paper or pet food used in practice. We currently have zero carbon options available for this. So it is possible to go down this pathway to source zero carbon products, at least in these two areas. Okay, so how to reduce Scope 3 emissions and really with buying smarter. And that's the major component of the scope of Module 5 in the Climate Care program. And really Module 5 is really about purchasing. Everything we buy comes with a carbon value which needs to be added to your carbon footprint. So we have purchasing power and we can influence suppliers to do better. So your net zero strategy leads you to review your purchasing systems in search of lower emissions alternatives. So here you can see an example of a ream of paper, which is actually carbon neutral. You can see the little logo there. So large international pharmaceutical companies and medical supply manufacturers have a vital role to play in the path to net zero. Most large international companies are now subject to government regulations requiring them to measure, report and reduce their carbon footprint, as well as disclosing their climate-related financial risk exposures to shareholders. So they're already engaging in the net zero process. But the unfortunate reality at the moment is that many of your purchases do not come with a known carbon value, and there are often no zero carbon alternatives. Remember that your Scope 3 emissions, your veterinary practice include all the supplies and consumables we use. So each item comes with an emissions intensity, and to know the exact amount of carbon due to each product, you actually need to perform what they call a life cycle assessment. And so to perform a life cycle assessment, it's a technical process, and I'm told it can cost up to $50,000 per item. So this process is best done by the manufacturer, who can then supply the data to their customers to input into their carbon audit. One of the features of the Climate Care program is that when you can't find a sustainable or low carbon option, you need to start asking and pressuring suppliers to come up with better options. They won't do it unless we start demanding it. However, it is also a little bit unreasonable to expect that vets and veterinary teams within the clinics, the end users of the products, are the ones that are driving all the change. And so another way to approach this is that manufacturers should be proactively providing products with their known carbon value and pushing this to the end users. And so here's a great opportunity for manufacturers to differentiate their product in a carbon-constrained world. So large international pharmaceutical manufacturers have a vital role to play in the path to net zero. And what we need from manufacturers, and I've listed it here, we need a net zero commitment from their organisation. We actually need a life cycle analysis of their products so we can plug that into our carbon audit. We ultimately need them to provide us with a zero carbon product. We also need zero emissions of the delivery of that product. We need sustainable packaging. And then ultimately, we want to take back all the waste and packaging in a circular, as you would in a circular economy. And so one of the tools within the climate care program, and it's one of the ways that we can start to put pressure back onto manufacturers, and it's something that we've been doing in our clinic for a couple of years now, is that whenever we have a lunch and learn, and you can see this photo on the right of a recent lunch and learn, and actually that was MSD doing a presentation there, but all lunch and learn presenters are required to fill out a short questionnaire, which I'll share in a minute, about what they are doing with regards to net zero and sustainability within the organisation that they represent. And to start each in-house presentation, they have to give a short presentation to our team about what they are doing. And this serves a number of purposes. It lets the suppliers know that we value low emissions. And it was interesting that the presenter here didn't realise how much their own company was actually doing about emissions reduction. And so she was really pleasantly surprised to be part of that organisation. It also supports the efforts of companies that are doing a lot. It raises awareness amongst the reps presenting. And also it's important to keep reminding our team that other people are doing this and that this is an important part of what we do. Okay, and so the other thing is how do we assess if a company is actually making a genuine effort towards net zero? And I have actually gone to the MSD Annual Report 2023 to pick out a few things here, and fortunately they're doing pretty well. But you can see here on the left the 5 questions we send out for the reps to respond to in the lunch and learn. So quickly, do you measure your carbon footprint? Do you have emissions targets? Do you have a reduction plan? Do you purchase carbon credits? And do you have sustainable packaging plans? So they're fairly simple but critical asks. And if we have a look here, they're measuring scope 1 and 2, and they're also measuring scope 3, and they have targets, and they're aiming to be carbon neutral across their scopes 1 and 2 by 2025. Interesting here, also we see the SBTI, which is the Science-Based Targets Initiative. That's an international standard that sets when a company wants to set their emissions goals, they need to get approved to a certain standard, and that's what this organisation does. And so that's a really important thing to look for. Do they purchase carbon credits? And you can see here that they intend to use high quality offsets to achieve their carbon neutrality in scopes 1 and 2. And again, back on the earlier thing I mentioned about carbon credits, that ideally these should be reserved for the last maybe 10% of difficult to reduce emissions. They shouldn't be used as a means of continuing business as usual and just buying carbon credits to get to net zero. Okay, this is just a little thing I sort of threw in towards the end, something that we've been talking about, Vets for Climate Action, to try and generate a bit more momentum within the veterinary community. So what about make October Sustainability Net Zero Month? So we already have Dental Month is in August, so perhaps October could be the month when we look at doing a whole lot of initiatives. And so in particular, this could be the time for annual reporting of emissions. So it means, particularly in our practice, it takes a couple of months after the end of the financial year to be able to pull together all the data to do our full carbon footprint audit and then report that to our team and also report that to the register that we are on. We can also use it in our socials to our clients, but it's a good time to review before you get into the busy summer period. One of the things that works really well in our practice, and again, this is again about lots of little things we do to engage the team. As I mentioned it before, the Lunch and Learn is a reminder about the importance of net zero, but things like having an e-waste collection day. So companies will only come and pick up e-waste if you've got a decent amount. We all know that e-waste builds up around the clinic throughout the year. Everyone at home has got cables, mobile phones, consoles, all sorts of things building up. So what we do is over a 2-week period, we get some boxes and get everyone to bring in their stuff and then have a single pickup day, and certainly something that our team really enjoys, and it's really good to be able to see a lot of that e-waste going to at least recycling. Other things that we could do in this month would things like have a sustainable raffle. Another thing is returning unwanted medications for disposal. So get clients to bring in all their medications. This is a container that you can get from your local chemist as part of the human medical waste return. And then also use your social media to celebrate your achievements throughout the year. This one here is one from the Greater Springfield Veterinary Hospital, and these are life stage boards. And so we have usually in the dog wards, you'll have a puppy, adult, senior, and then you can add in a future board. And I really like this photo here. But just you can list some of the things that you're doing in your practice to try and reduce emissions. And also, you know, we'd look to bring in obviously the wholesalers and manufacturers to get on board and try and build some momentum for October and Sustainability Month. Okay, so we're just about to wrap it up. Some of the resources that I've found useful, and I hope you might like to have a look at some of these. So firstly, the Vets for Climate Action Climate Care Program available on our website. The Masterclass Climate Care Program, so last year's program which we did on the Climate Care Program. The Path to Net Zero in Veterinary Practice, which is a paper that I co-authored with 3 other veterinary professionals, which is available on Frontiers in Veterinary Science. Vet Sustain in the UK is really active in the sustainability space. They run some great webinars. And then another thing that I find really useful is called ESG Today, and it's really a curated daily news feed of all things sustainable around the world, and it covers everything from corporate to government to even down to small business. So that's definitely a good way of keeping in touch with what is a rapidly changing space. And then again, another plug to donate for the VfCA. We definitely do need your monthly donations to keep supporting our actions. So in summary, net zero drives sustainable change and innovation in your practice. We know climate change is guaranteed to progress, so we may as well be strategic in our response. The Climate Care Program has all the tools you need to drive your net zero success. Collaboration is the key to solving the climate crisis, and there's that word again, collaboration. Also, the path to net zero is rapidly evolving, so be prepared to be creative and dynamic. Not everything is going to work, and we don't have solutions for everything yet, but we do have a process. We just need to stop fiddling and get on with it. And then another mention for donating to the Vets for Climate Action. And finally, why you should use net zero, and it's pretty simple. The purpose is very clear: better animal health. The goal is simple: net zero by 2050, and the process is easy: just measure carbon and reduce. And the 2 tools that you need as vets to do something about climate action are join up to the Climate Care Program, donate to the VfCA so we can start advocating and supporting the wider public to get better policies to deal with climate change. That's what we need to do as vets. So thank you tonight for your time and attention, and that completes my presentation, and I'm happy to take questions from anyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. If anyone does have a question, feel free to pop your hand up or take yourself off mute and put your question in the chat as well.
Shall I talk to that question there about reduced pet ownership?
Sure.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's an interesting point. It's been argued that a lot of the tactics used by the fossil fuel industry about telling us what we can't have, rather than saying what we can have and how we can find a solution to having the things that we like, but just going about it in a different way to achieve a net zero outcome. And that's where I think this whole thing of systems analysis is really critical, because, and this is again what we found, going back to our anesthesia, is that a really good system analysis leads to some creative outcomes and solutions. And you find that, we could continue to deliver good quality anesthesia, but within a reduced emissions environment. And so I think, things like pet ownership needs to be tackled from that point of view, and rather than sort of saying, well, no, you can't have that. And therefore that's only probably going to reduce your widespread political support. And I think that's part of the problem where a lot of campaigns to deal with climate change have fallen down, because the community is not being brought along. So I think we've really got to try and be creative and find solutions that enable low carbon or zero carbon outcomes for doing the things that we continue to like to do and enjoy.
Amazing. Thanks, Jeremy. Thank you, Helen. I think that was.
Jeremy, Neil Walton here.
Hello. Hi, Neil. How are you?
I'm well, my friend. How are you?
Good, thanks.
I mean, we've spoken briefly about this anaesthesia question before, and I really understand the inhalational problem. But if we're going to use less inhalationals and more injectables, we do have to look at the cost of production of injectables. It's not just get rid of the inhalationals and replace it with something else. There is also a cost of producing more injectables as well, potentially more, I suspect. So it's not quite, I don't think it's quite, get rid of inhalationals and everything will be okay. And there are, as you know, restrictions on how much you can use injectables as well. So, in terms of how often, how long a procedure can go with injectables. So it's a bit of a vexed subject that I'm not quite sure I've got my head around it yet. So more discussion there. I think it's a really complicated problem, especially in my field, which is equine, and it's very difficult to do procedures on injectables for very long. So it's a really complicated problem, that one.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's lots of issues to consider there, and I think again, using carbon as your kind of metric, what we really need to have is accurate carbon measurement of all the things we use, so we can make an informed decision, and then decide which is going to be the most effective from a carbon point of view, and then how that impacts on, so I was getting back to that thing about management needing to align with their strategies. So how does a reduced carbon alternative affect your budgets, affect your standards of care and other things within your practice, and then you make a more informed decision that way. Just on the impact of injectables versus gas, there is that app from Yale University called Gassing Greener. I don't know whether you've seen that. You can plug in your flow rates, your injectable use, etc., and it will give you a carbon value for the type of anaesthesia you're choosing. So, and certainly when you plug into that, all the injectables are just a minuscule fraction of the gas alternatives. So the other thing is, I guess my area is general practice. The vast majority of procedures we do are going to be relatively short procedures on healthy animals, and so the potential for total intravenous is just so easy. We can now do most of our castrations just under a pre-med local anaesthetic and oxygen
Yeah,
without
sure,
giving
sure.
it at all. So
Yeah.
there's lots of what we call that low hanging fruit. I get in equine anaesthesia, particularly long procedures. Yeah, there's still a long way to go, but we need the systems analysis and the creative thinking that brings, with a driver of always looking for the lower carbon option as being how we can start to solve some of these more difficult situations that we're presented with. And so we're not going to be able to solve it all now, but
No.
we need to solve it by 2050 is really the goal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We'll get that survey out that we talked about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for that, Neil. Did anyone else have any questions before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I'd like to hop in if that's okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Jeremy. It's Peter Irons here from Murdoch. At the beginning, when you did the Slido poll, one of the options was to, how to make an impact by influencing clients and influencing your clientele. Now, I realize that doesn't fall into net zero scope 1, 2, or 3. And it's also, no doubt something that's very difficult, if possible at all, to measure. But, do you have any sort of experience and any anecdotes about how your practice goes in terms of changing client behavior and feedback from clients?
Yeah, look, that's probably of all the things that we've done, that's, I think, been the most challenging area to try and generate some traction. And there's sort of a couple of considerations there. Now, the obvious thing that, there's often put out, particularly by a lot of the climate organisations, is to try and say, well, whenever there's an extreme weather event like a heat wave, then that could be used to say, right, well, how is that impacting on animal health? Which, everyone kind of gets that. But, what do you do for the other 320 days of the year when you don't have an extreme weather event? How do you generate some sort of conversation about climate that is kind of not awkward? And I suppose what we're trying to do is make it a kind of like a normalized part of what we do within the team, and so that if any discussions about how we are doing things in the clinic, then you might mention up, oh yes, that's part of our sustainability program or whatever. And so, for example, in our clinic, we've got electric vehicle park out the front. That's the thing that's generated the most discussion with me and clients, is they want to know about that. So having things that people like and can benefit what they do is probably good ways of engaging that conversation. It was quite a good webinar from Vet Sustain a couple of months ago about team engagement, and there's things like using gamifying things, competitions, that sort of thing. For example, you could have a competition to make the most interesting, fun recycling containers in your consulting room. So they could be finished up being things that would generate a discussion from the clients. Hey, I really love that. Yeah, that's part of this. That's part of our net zero strategy, that sort of thing. So make that being a lead into a conversation about, well, we're reducing our carbon footprint because of its impact on animal health, and just having a few key lines. So that's the sort of process we've been trying to develop, but it needs to be done in a way that's not manufactured or awkward, and the staff feel comfortable in bringing it up where appropriate. So those life stage boards also, I guess they're kind of like, they're in all the consult rooms in our practice, the junior, the adult, the senior, and the future boards. So there's lots of, I guess, more passive type communication going on as well, but definitely a lot to be explored in there. And again, Sustainability Month could be something that brings all that to a focus as well.
Oh,
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, Pete. Did anyone else have any questions? I'll just have a quick flick through, see if anyone's got their hand up. No, I'm just going to pop in the chat the VFCA website, and then also the email, just in case you do have any follow-up questions that spring to mind. Usually happens to me as soon as we log off. It's just info@vfca.org.au. So it's just in the chat there. But I'd just like to thank our amazing presenter, Jeremy, for that very informative presentation. Sincerely appreciate the time and effort you put into that, as well as our generous sponsor, MSD Animal Health. Megan, thank you so much for your presentation at the beginning there as well. And a huge thank you to everyone for attending this presentation this evening. I'll be uploading the recording to our website and our YouTube channel. And I just want to mention, if you have a topic in mind that you would like to see in one of our masterclasses or have any feedback or questions on tonight's masterclass, please email us at that email I popped into the chat. But thank you guys. That wraps up our April masterclass, and I hope you all keep an eye out for our upcoming May masterclass. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Claire.